3 very disturbing night terrors with delivery. During my senior year of high school, I kept a steady job as a pizza delivery driver. I had consistently worked the night shifts on Fridays and Saturdays due to academic obligations. The position entailed a relatively relaxed schedule, with the majority of my time spent either driving or standing in the shop to take phone orders. Additionally, a few of my acquaintances were employed there, which ensured that I consistently had company for conversation. Regardless, it was Friday evening and I had just returned from my final break. Prior to our departure at 1 a.m., we typically cease accepting orders at 12 p.m., as we still have to complete the cleaning and other preparations. Despite the time being 11:30, I resolved to spare the time by commencing the cleaning in advance. That evening, only myself and 2 other companions were at work. One of us was just finishing up a delivery, while the other had just returned from a break. A few minutes after returning home and beginning to clean, the phone began to sound. I answered it and inquired how I could be of assistance. An elderly gentleman on the line inquired whether or not we were still accepting deliveries. "Yes," I replied, "but we do not accept sizable orders at this time." They responded that was acceptable, requested a standard pizza, and provided the delivery address. After approximately 15 minutes, the pizza was done, and I packed it and entered my vehicle. I was approximately halfway to the destination, which was 10 minutes away, when I approached from behind another vehicle that was stationary at a stop sign on an unoccupied road. After observing his surroundings for a few seconds to determine why he was being stopped for such an extended period of time, I softly honked my horn, presuming he had fallen asleep or something. I began to draw alongside him as the vehicle remained stationary, but he pressed the gas and jolted forward down the road just as I did so. I was mildly irritated, but I assumed it was merely a nutjob acting frivolously, so I proceeded further along the road. However, I passed that same vehicle a few minutes later as it was stopped on the side of the road with its headlights off. Passing them gave me a terrible sense of unease, as if something were amiss with the situation. The remainder of the way to the house, I scrutinized my reflections to ensure that he was not attempting to pursue me. I ultimately descended the lengthy driveway leading to the residence, which traversed a dense woodland. After parking my vehicle in the front yard and ensuring that I had all the necessary items, I approached the residence and proceeded to tap on the door. 2 minutes later, an elderly woman responded and inquired as to what I was up to. I informed her that I would be delivering the pizza to the specified address and proceeded to recite it to her. Upon hearing that no one in the room had placed an order for pizza, it was clear that she felt poor for my situation. She was simply thanked, and I returned to my vehicle. This occurrence was not exceptional. Certain individuals would engage in it unintentionally as a hoax or provide the incorrect address by mistake. I reasoned that after exiting the woman's driveway, I would contact my acquaintance to request that they confirm the address via phone call. Therefore, I began to make my way out of the driveway. However, as I descended, the intense beams obscured my view from ahead. It was so dazzling that I immediately applied the brakes, certain that an approaching vehicle was the cause. I awaited the vehicle until it either turned off its lights or reverse, but after a short while of waiting, I concluded that they were not going to move. I had no idea what to do because my vision was hazy, and I was aware that the driveway was narrow, rendering it impossible to navigate around them. Given the lack of viable alternatives, I made the decision to observe their initial action. We both remained motionless for an entire minute before they turned out the lights entirely. I looked in that direction to see where their vehicle was, after allowing my eyes to recalibrate to the darkness, but I was unable to make it out. Putting the vehicle back in drive, I made my way down the driveway gradually, exercising caution in case the other vehicle resumed its descent. A few seconds later, I noticed the vehicle parked in the middle of the path with no headlights on. I was able to identify it as the vehicle that had been located at the stop sign. It appears that he followed me in my absence. Due to the lack of visibility through the windows caused by the darkness, I became increasingly anxious and concerned as I sat there, apprehensive that there might be several individuals inside with malicious intentions. Then, upon the front driver door opening, a male exited the vehicle and started to approach me. He stopped halfway to my vehicle and started waving at me as if to request that I drive up next to him. I would be committing an outright admission of my increasing anxiety at this juncture. Despite my best efforts to maintain composure, I rolled the car next to him. Regarding the price, he remained silent and avoided eye contact as he walked around my vehicle. ultimately stopping directly behind me by the trunk when I approached. As I regarded my rearview mirror, I endeavored to discern his whereabouts and determine why he was remaining stationary. I have been observing this individual for a few moments when I have an abrupt realization and turn my head to face the front. The remaining 3 car doors open, and 3 additional men begin to dash towards my vehicle. As soon as my adrenaline began to surge, I floored the gas and nearly collided with one of the men as I reversed my vehicle out of the driveway. I nearly collided with multiple trees as I swerved to avoid colliding with their vehicle before regaining the path and ultimately emerging onto the main road. At this moment, there was no one else on the road, so I could see every detail in my rearview mirror as the vehicle emerged onto the road and began approaching me. I assumed they wouldn't stop until I could find a less isolated location, but the men turned down a side road after 30 seconds. I returned to work and informed my colleagues about the incident without delay. Both individuals persuaded me to report the incident to the police by calling them, despite my limited ability to provide useful information. After I provided an official statement regarding the incident and an officer descended, they departed. The day before we were scheduled to close, I was taken aback when I received a phone call informing me that 3 of the men involved in the attempted robbery that occurred in the driveway where I was standing earlier that evening had been arrested. The men were apprehended when the woman alerted the police in response to 2 additional individuals attempting to deliver her unordered food. It appears that they intended to entice delivery drivers to their location and then rob them as they departed, given that the driveway was narrow, isolated, and surrounded by trees. Nonetheless, the 4th individual managed to escape by squeezing through the trees, and I received no further information regarding his whereabouts in the days that followed, so it is uncertain whether he was ever located. However, the elderly woman stated that she was not informed and had not observed them in the driveway prior to that evening. Although the fact that this occurred to me is quite peculiar, I am also pleased with my prompt reaction time and the fact that I managed to escape unscathed. Despite the undeniable increase in tension at work, I was able to modify my shift schedule to exclusively operate on weekends during the daytime shortly thereafter. I sincerely hope that last perpetrator was apprehended, as his escape could have put an untold number of individuals in those horrifying situations. During my freshman and sophomore years of college, I primarily worked as a food delivery driver for DoorDash or Uber Eats. As I disliked conversing with strangers and didn't want random individuals in my car, I opted to deliver food instead of driving for Uber. I oversaw this for more than a year with minimal complications, with the exception of the sporadic customer who was irate that the establishment made a mistake with their order. In any case, it was late on a Wednesday night and I had no classes the following morning, so I decided to deliver for a small fee in order to earn a few additional dollars. After completing 4 or 5 fast orders, I was back in my dorm room within 20 minutes. It was approaching 1 a.m., so I reasoned that I should probably conclude it there and return home. The operation of delivery apps essentially entails driving around and waiting for a random order to appear. The app will then provide you with an estimate of the distance and amount of money you'll be required to travel, and you can accept or decline the order. I left the application operating on my way back in the event that an incredibly urgent delivery was nearby. I received a few requests, but they seemed a bit too distant and unworthy of my time. However, as I was entering my dorm, another one materialized. Although situated at a distance of 15 miles, the compensation was enormous. Before, I had never witnessed anyone offer that much money. It was quite distant, so I gave it some thought, but the price was simply too good to pass up. I accepted the offer and began my way in the direction of the restaurant. However, I arrived a few minutes later and drew up to their table in order to verify that I had purchased the correct items. Upon entering the establishment, I observed that the customer had placed an order for a mere 2 items, with a cumulative bill of less than $6. This occurrence was highly atypical, given that high-paying orders generally result from substantial shipments of high-priced food. This essentially meant that they were leaving me a colossal tip. I returned to my vehicle after obtaining the sustenance. As I drove there, all I could think about was how they could have given such a large tip for such a modest order. It was a little peculiar, but in all honesty, I concluded that it was either an oversight or an attempt at benevolence on their part. Despite the fact that 15 miles did not seem particularly far from my campus, I had yet to visit this region. The area was quite pleasant, consisting primarily of gated communities and enormous homes. Fortunately, their residents lacked a gate, allowing me to simply drive into the neighborhood. As I passed by the residences, I realized that the tip money had become much clearer. Despite the street's length, I was within a few minutes of approaching the residence when the client transmitted a text message via the application. They instructed me to ensure that the food was delivered to the correct address. Upon my arrival, I reasoned that the map may have depicted his neighbor's residence or something, so I texted him a picture of the structure and inquired whether that was the correct one. He responded in the negative, and I waited a moment for him to elaborate on the details of his residence, but he never did. However, he blocked me after I sent him another text message describing his neighbor's residence. As I grew increasingly irritated with this individual, I attempted to call him, but received no answer. After the phone had rung several times, he would decline the call. After re-examining the address, I proceeded to enter it into Google in an attempt to locate it. As I was performing this action, I observed that the address number was not a typical one. It was adorned with a subset of numerals. I was uncertain of its meaning and had never seen it before, so I looked up the address on Google and examined the results. I discovered, upon closer inspection of the map, that the address in fact indicated a location precisely between the two residences. Upon closer inspection, it appeared that there was a minuscule garage, or possibly a barn. It could hardly be seen. When I averted my gaze from my smartphone to the area between the two residences, I observed what appeared to be a compact structure resembling a garage. A few feet separated it from the primary residence that my delivery application directed me to. Honestly, I had no idea what to expect or why anyone would even choose to reside there, but I had already traveled this far, so I had no intention of leaving at this time. So, I exited the building and began to make my way there. As I ascended the driveway, the location became readily apparent. Essentially, it was a sizable storage garage, most likely designed for storing an obsolete automobile or something. However, I failed to observe a typical door, so I positioned the bag against the garage door and retrieved my phone in order to capture an image for the application. An individual approached the garage from the right side. As I turned to face him, he was simply standing there and gazing at me. I carefully began to walk away after stating, "It's right here for you, sir," while pointing to the bag, because the individual was extremely unsettling. He then responded that this was not the location where he wanted me to leave it. Upon turning around, I observed that he had not moved from where he had been standing. "Alas, where exactly did you want me to place it?" I said, as I began to feel extremely uneasy about the situation. He indicated the door by circling the rear of the garage and declared it to be there. There was no way I could have followed that individual to whatever he was attempting to convince me to do at that moment. I simply remained motionless for a moment before apologizing and hastening back to my vehicle. As I reassessed the situation from my vehicle, I noticed that the man was returning behind the garage while neglecting to return the container of food. I drove the entire distance back to my lodgings while trembling after leaving that location. I felt extremely uneasy about the situation, and the fact that it was situated in a particularly pleasant neighborhood only added to my perplexity. Further reflection revealed how peculiar it was that he insisted I deliver the food to the garage and did not want it delivered to the main residence, and that he refused to accept the food unless I accompanied him there. Never in my entire life had I been required to call the police, and I ultimately refrained from doing so this time around, uncertain as to whether or not he was merely a peculiar, innocuous individual. Regardless, it caused me some distress for a few days, but I overcame it in the end and continued making deliveries during my free time. All else, however, transpired as planned. A couple of weeks later, my app displayed another sizable order with the same delivery area. Clearly, I declined, but I couldn't help but consider the circumstances surrounding the delivery of the order that was ultimately accepted. I began the autumn season by working as a cashier at a small store in close proximity to my apartment. After my regular workday concluded at 9 p.m., I would typically spend a couple of hours completing food deliveries before returning home. Deliveries at night were my favorite because the roadways were less congested, and the majority of other delivery drivers were at work during the day, when they would take all the orders. Consequently, I would receive more orders to complete at night. In any case, I had just finished work and was setting up my app in preparation for making some deliveries. The initial one that was received was completed in approximately 15 minutes. I then awaited the arrival of the subsequent order for a few moments. The payout was satisfactory, and the delivery location was 20 minutes distant from my current location. Following my return from the fast food establishment, I proceeded towards the residents in order to retrieve their food. My municipality is relatively small and contains numerous vacant parcels of land. The majority of restaurants in the town center, where my accommodation is located, are situated in that area. Then, approximately 10 minutes away, the dwellings become considerably more dispersed and are surrounded by farmland. While the majority of the deliveries I receive occur within the town vicinity, I do receive the occasional package that travels further into the rural area. I anticipated that this would be a farmhouse based on the fact that it was 20 minutes distant. The application, on the other hand, indicated that the address was situated in a residential area adjacent to a minor thoroughfare. It simply terrified me to make nighttime deliveries to isolated farmhouses, so I was relieved to be making a delivery to a neighborhood residence. As soon as I exited the highway and began walking in the direction of the neighborhood, I made a left turn and received a phone call from an unidentified number almost immediately. I declined the call because I suspected it was a scam, but they phoned back a few seconds later. Assuming it was the client, I reluctantly consented to it. "Hello?" I inquired. Without receiving a response after a few seconds, I simply hung up. Once more, however, the identical number called me a few moments later. I responded, and a man informed me almost immediately that I had made a mistake by turning in the incorrect direction. As I had the map up, and it indicated that I was proceeding in the correct direction, I inquired as to his meaning. He explained that his address is frequently misrepresented on the delivery app, and that he must always contact the drivers to give them the correct direction. I consented, and inquired as to how he could reach the location. After exiting the highway, he instructed me to turn right onto that road, and then make a third left. He stated that a gravel path ultimately lead to his farmhouse. After indicating my arrival time in a few minutes, I reversed the vehicle. It was fairly common out here for customers to call me, informing me that the address was off, or to provide directions on unnamed roadways, so I honestly didn't give it much thought. After passing the highway onto which I had deviated, I proceeded until I reached the third left turn and alighted onto the gravel path. The pathway led into a dimly lit forest comprised of trees. Once more, these areas did not sit well with me at night, so I was undeniably apprehensive as I traversed this secluded gravel road. As soon as I began to feel uneasy, I began to wonder how peculiar it was that the map had led me so far in the opposite direction of the man's purported residence. I attempted to suppress those thoughts by assuring myself that my nervousness was the cause of my overthinking. Even after a few moments had elapsed, there was still no sign of the house. Even though I was uncertain whether I had taken the correct turn, the trees were too near to the sides to allow for a significant turnaround. I reasoned that I would proceed until the end, at which point I would call to inquire whether I had arrived at the correct location, and if not, I would turn around there. 2 more minutes passed before I eventually arrived at the terminus, where the road turned into a narrow, circular driveway adjacent to a residence. I approached the entrance via the pathway and positioned my vehicle in close proximity to a commercial advertisement affixed to the front facade of the residence. Seeing this, I was uncertain whether I was looking at the correct residence. However, upon examining the front door, I noticed that it was ajar and an individual further back was waving to me. Assuming I was in excellent health, I retrieved the bag and began to make my way to the door. As I descended the porch and commenced setting the bag down, I beheld the man once more traversing the corridor that terminated at the kitchen. He asked me if I could place the food on the kitchen counter, then hurriedly departed as if he were in a hurry. I then overheard him turn on the kitchen faucet. I entered the residence with reluctance and peered around. Despite being adorned with vintage furnishings and accessories, the space appeared nearly devoid of any utilization. Upon descending the hallway and entering the kitchen, I immediately observed that the sink continued to run, while the man remained unseen. This caused cold sweats to stream down my face, and I hurriedly positioned the bag on the counter before evacuating the area. As I returned to my vehicle, I could hear the man yelling from the front door, but I was unable to decipher something he said. After putting the vehicle in motion, I returned in the same direction I had come from. I continued driving until I reached my apartment complex's parking lot. I then retrieved my phone and discovered that I had missed multiple calls from the same number. After blocking the number and resuming my nightly deliveries, I proceeded to access the delivery app. However, at that moment, I became cognizant of messages from the customer via the app, which informed me that I had made an error in direction and was currently at the incorrect residence. I was momentarily taken aback when I realized that the man who had contacted me was not my actual client and that the residence I was in belonged to an unknown individual. I promptly contacted the police and informed them of the situation. An officer visited my apartment to provide additional information. I was perplexed as to how this individual had obtained information that I was making a delivery and could have tracked my location shortly thereafter. According to the officer, my phone was most likely compromised, and the man was likely observing my every move. Upon receiving this information, I was immediately uneasy. To make matters worse, the following day, I was informed that the property I was viewing, which had been listed for sale months prior, was in fact vacant. Evidently, the individual gained access by means of an unlocked window situated in one of the chambers. At this time, nothing substantial has been discovered that could lead to the man's location, which makes me feel extremely unsafe. I do not know for certain what the man was attempting to accomplish, but it seems reasonable to assume that he intended to abduct me or something even more heinous. Although I make an effort to curb my thoughts, I cannot help but ruminate on the multitude of dreadful possibilities that could have transpired that evening. In the aftermath of this terrifying experience, I became hypervigilant about my personal safety, ensuring that my phone's security measures were up to date and that I never shared my location unnecessarily. I also started carrying pepper spray with me during my deliveries and made sure to inform a trusted friend or family member of my whereabouts at all times. Despite these precautions, the memory of that night still haunts me, serving as a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, even in seemingly safe neighborhoods. I hope that by sharing my story, others will be more cautious and aware of the potential risks associated with gig economy jobs, especially those that require interacting with strangers in isolated locations. It's essential to prioritize safety above all else, even if it means turning down lucrative opportunities or inconveniencing oneself in the short term. Ultimately, nothing is more valuable than one's well-being and peace of mind.